excellent morning to all of you on out there, my dear friends. It is a beautiful day today that the Lord hath made. We shall rejoice and be glad in it. I thank you all for tuning in once again. We are now going to be going over Revelation 18. We just left off of Revelation 17 with the whore of Babylon. We're told about her rise and then her fate being actually destroyed by the Antichrist himself at about the 3.5 year mark. Now we're going to be getting into the other aspect of this Babylon. And by the end of this study, I will prove basically, because the very last verse proves that Babylon is representing the entirety of the world's evil systems. In the previous chapter, we observed the destruction of the whore of Babylon, i.e., the ecumenical religious system of the Antichrist rule, which is present even to this day. We see it with the many religions around the world. In this chapter, we will be observing the other factors of the Antichrist rule, namely the economic commercial system under his reign. Now, for all of you who believe that this Babylon, this whore of Babylon, is still being spoken of in Revelation 18, well, there are differences that can be identified with in between these two chapters, namely that the symbol of Revelation 17 is a harlot woman, whereas in the chapter that we're studying today, 18, it's a great city. So you have the harlot woman and right here the great city. It's identified with Rome, the city upon 7 hills, inland. This is identified with port cities. This is coastal. In Revelation 17, it's speaking of a woman, a whore, a mother. The descriptives in this chapter is a habitation, a great city, a marketplace. In Revelation 17, we see it's guilty of religious abominations. In this chapter, it's guilty of greed and self-indulgence. And finally, in Revelation 17, the whore of Babylon is destroyed by a political power that previously supported her, whereas this Babylon is destroyed by a sudden act of God. In chapter 18, the chapter that we're going to be studying today, the context seems to indicate that Babylon here is viewed in its political and economic character rather than its religious aspect, which we went over in the previous chapter. So that's enough introduction for this chapter. Let's get right into it. And after these things, after this whore of Babylon's destruction, which we already said was at the 3.5 year mark, after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. So recently has this angel come from the presence of God that in passing he flings a broad belt of light across the dark earth, and man, is it ever dark at this time. And this angel cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils. Catch that. It is now the home of devils, demons, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. With all the destruction of the world's industries, it seems like there's so much death that now the demons that did embody the evil people of the world, now it seems like they're just kind of roaming about in dry places, seeking rest and finding none because their hosts have been killed. We read in Isaiah 13 this, And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. But wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there. Now, satyrs, that's either a he-goat or a devil. So we're being told in the Old Testament about how devils will roam about in this destroyed Babylon. Her palaces are seen to be prisons, her highest wisdom little more than low cunning, her most exalted intelligence base-born, her sweetest songs discordant cries. The evil spirit, welcome back, has come in sevenfold power. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues, for her sins have reached unto heaven. Catch this, now he's talking to Babylon, the same place that built the Tower of Babel. He's saying, okay, well, there's no tower that's reached up to heaven, but their sins certainly have. And God hath remembered her iniquities, whereas he forgets ours, he remembers hers. Now notice how this voice is saying, come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers with her sins. Well, that called me back to the days of Lot, whenever Lot, the nephew of Abraham, who loved the Lord, yet was drawn into the worldly temptations of Sodom. Though Lot was spared from the city's destruction, his wife foolishly looked back, possibly signifying a desire to go back into such a sinful place. She wasn't destroyed for merely looking back. You can do that accidentally. She did something willingly in her heart where she participated with that very same city, Sodom. And Christ said that these last days at his second coming would be like the days of Lot. So we're seeing how there will be many Christian Lots going into these worldly systems, but a Christian may be in the midst of an incredibly evil place. For example, like Paul in Corinth or even in Rome, yet keep their hearts from temptations. Though the longer there they reside, their souls, like Lot's, will be vexed constantly. Better to find a quiet place and walk humbly with the Lord thy God. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works. And the cup which she hath filled, fill to her double. How much she hath glorified herself, and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. That made me remember what Paul the Apostle says about how this city has the exact same attitude as Jezebel of old. Remember, right before she's destroyed, she's putting on makeup, and Jehu, he's on his way to kill her. He has her in his target. He just wants to brutally destroy her. And here she is, just calmly putting on makeup, wanting to look real pretty, thinking that she's going to escape this horrendous manner of death that she's about to experience, tremendous pain upon her, yet she doesn't. And even her own people that surround her betray her. And I feel like that's the very, very same thing that's happening to the world in these last days. But Paul the Apostle wrote, Now she that is a widow indeed and desolate trusteth in God, and continueth in supplications and prayers night and day. But she that liveth in pleasure is dead while she liveth. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judgeth her, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning. Of course they're going to lament for her. That's how they made all their money. Now they're seeing how it profits them nothing. Now notice how it says that all these plagues come in one day. Now I believe that that's more meaning suddenly. There'll be it'll be destroyed very, very quickly. In one day, they shall come in a time when she is living in ease and security. The world will be marrying, giving into marriage, no problems. They'll be partying every night, still having a great time upon the earth. No trouble will come upon us. And then suddenly, these plagues shall come at the same time, so that all these terrible judgments shall seem to be poured upon her at once. Standing afar off, for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more. The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones, and of pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet, and all Thyan wood, and all manner vessels of ivory, and all manner vessels of most precious wood, and of brass, and iron, and marble, and cinnamon, and odors, and ointments, and frankincense, and wine, and oil, and fine flour, and wheat, and beasts, and sheep, and horses, and chariots, and slaves, and souls of men, meaning everything that you all used to rely upon, selling to live lavishly upon the earth, all that's cut off now. You make nothing. And the fruits that thou so lusted after, that they are departed from thee. and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. Are we not told of old about not setting our eyes on worldly things, fleshly things, and desires of this world? Wilt thou set thine eyes upon that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away as an eagle toward heaven. Just as the rich fool that Christ spoke of looked upon his great wealth, ignorant that he would only enjoy it for a couple of hours before being utterly swallowed up forever by eternity into a realm where there are nor have ever been any of his beloved fleeting riches, so is the world today. For all that is in the world, 1 John 2 says, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passeth away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God abideth forever. The merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, Alas, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And every shipmaster and all the company in ships and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? It almost brings my mind back to what they said of the Titanic. At least it's an old saying that they said that the Titanic, not even God could sink the Titanic. And that's kind of the sort of confidence that these appear to have in their industries, and how their riches will never be taken from them. All of a sudden, it's all snatched away and they're left without anything. For all of you history buffs on out there, you may recall what Germany experienced back in the 20s with hyperinflation. In 1922, a loaf of bread in Germany cost 163 marks. By September 1923, about a year later, during hyperinflation, because they were paying reparations back, and all of a sudden they were printing so much money that it just amounted to costing it amounted to being worth nothing. We're seeing that happen today, mind you. The price crawled up for a loaf of bread from 163 marks 1 year later to 1.5 million marks. And at the peak of hyperinflation in November of 1923, a loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. And right here you see a whole pile of cash being prepared for burning. This is why I feel so sorry for those in whom are just obsessed. They're so enamored with just trying to make money. They just want more. And the more that they get, the more that they want. And it's just like John Rockefeller. He said back in his day, they asked him once, one of the richest men ever, I believe he was the richest man in the world at the time, and they said, well, Mr. Rockefeller, how much is enough? How much money is enough? And his response was, just a little bit more. He always wanted just a little bit more. And that's what they do. They just always seek for that more and more. It's complicated for us to get our minds around people being so obsessed with money, but most people of the world are. And these cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, Alas, alas, that great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour is she made desolate. Notice the mourning after mourning after mourning. It's almost like their God is dead, for the love of money is the root of all evil. And Jesus says you cannot serve God and mammon. Well, mammon is destroyed at this time. But notice how all this lamenting is happening with the world at this time. But see the message that's given unto us, the saints. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. Notice it says how God has avenged us. Let this verse be all the proof needed that God's eternal promise of vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. stands forever, as in the days of old, to the very end. We need not be concerned with ultimate justice being done, as God has promised it most certainly will be. But also observe how this millstone, this angel's taking this stone and casting it into the sea. Well, this harkens back to Jeremiah. The taking up of the stone and casting it into the waters is a symbol drawn from Jeremiah 51. Jeremiah the prophet enjoined Sariah to bind the prophetic roll to a great stone and cast them together into the Euphrates. The meaning of the act was explained. Thus shall Babylon sink and shall not rise. So this stone is to represent Babylon, basically, because the great dead mass, like the stone, sinking helplessly by its own weight, signified a fall past recovery. Just as you'll never see a great millstone swim its way back up to the top, you'll never see Babylon be revived after this. So Pharaoh and his host sank like lead in the mighty waters. It is the doom Christ foreshadows as awaiting those who caused his children to fall. Remember how he says, better for you to go and tie a millstone around your neck and cast it into the sea than to harm one of these little ones. The mighty angel, strong to lift the ponderous stone, throws it into the sea, saying, thus with violence shall Babylon, the great city, be thrown and shall not be found any more. And the voice of harpers and musicians and of pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in thee, and no craftsman of whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee, and the sound of a millstone shall be heard no more at all in thee. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee, for thy merchants were the great men of the earth. For by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. Just a couple of things in closing to point out how it says that, first of all, it's the great men of the earth. So whenever you see Bill Gates and Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and all these billionaires and Bezos and all these, Amazon, Google, you see all these great, all that will be done away with. They have just a few short years at the most to enjoy their billions and billions, because at the end of all of it, it'll mean nothing. All that they'll have is their relationship with God or not. It's very scary. But for by thy sorceries, it says, by the world's sorceries were the people deceived. Sorcery is the English translation of the Greek word pharmakia. Though this term has to do with using medicine, our word pharmacy is derived from it. It's actually where we get pharmacy from, the word sorcery of old, pharmakia. In biblical times, pharmakia included drugs used in occult rituals and even poisoning. So it's basically like saying how the people were so enamored by the lights, the glitz, and the glamour, and prostitution, and the drugs, and the rock and roll, and the music, and the concerts, the flashy lights, all of this. The people were so enamored. It's kind of like Las Vegas, or L.A., Los Angeles, Hollywood. It's kind of like New York and all the glitz and the glamour that goes on, how the people are just blinded by all of it. And it's basically like drugging people. That's what the world will do. That's what they're doing now. But as used in the Bible, sorcery is a broad term that would include hallucinogenic and poisonous drugs, witchcraft, voodoo, palm reading, tarot cards, Ouija boards, astrology, fortune-telling, horoscopes, seances, and the like. God has forever frowned on sorcery, and we know that all these things are still going on today. But as I said at the beginning of this, how the very last verse, which is, and in her, Babylon, was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. Well, that proves that this Babylon is all the world's systems. In this final verse, we clearly see how this Babylon represents the entirety of the world's systems, as how can all the blood of all the saints and prophets be confined to only one city, or 10 cities, or 20, or 30, or 40? This Babylon is symbolic for all the world. But my dear friends, that is it for today. I thank you all for joining me. Babylon is fallen. And now you see the distinction, hopefully, between Revelation 17 and 18, how one's religious, the other's economic, and all that. But hopefully you learned something, my dear friends. I thank you all for joining me. And Lord willing, next week we'll be closing our study on the book of Revelation. I've thoroughly enjoyed coming this far, at least. Thank you all for participating. God of peace be with you. Amen.